Okay, it's 5:32. Call a meeting of the Finance and Personnel Committee to order. Roll call.
Okay, John, Todd Kirking,
Here.
Emma,
Nope.
Todd Spaeth,
Here.
and Crystal on her way.
On our way.
First period for public comment.
We got a couple people online. If anybody online would like to make a comment, they can unmute their lines and speak now, name and address, and try to keep it to 2 or 3 minutes. I think you're good, Todd.
Okay. Approval of the minutes from 9/9/25.
I will move approval of those minutes.
Todd, I'll second it.
Okay. Approved and seconded. And payment of the bills. Oh, yeah, we got to. What do we have to? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. We need a motion in a second. Just a voice vote? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Go ahead.
Okay,
You're on a
item
roll.
number 4, payment of the bills.
Okay, so on the bills, nothing too exciting. On the original bills, I just point out on page 5, we did have pay request 13 for the fire station project. So that was a big one for $1 million, but that was already approved after the last meeting. And then at the bottom of page 6 was the already approved pay request number 2 for the salt shed project. At the top of page 6, if you notice, there's quite a few milestone materials invoices, and some of them were dated at the end of June. That was just an issue that we'll work out with IT. They had old emails for Jody and Chad Hoyam, and they must not have been kicking back, so they had no idea we hadn't received them, and then they reached out. So that's why there's quite a few of those this time. And then on the last page, Lori has a couple payments to the bond trust services.
So the only thing I'll just, as a heads up, that $1 million payment for the fire station, we have already received reimbursement on that from USDA for our grant for the fire station. So that was really nicely. It actually prevented us from having to do an interim financing for that pay request. So thank you to Julie at the USDA for making that happen so quickly.
And then on additional bills, again, maybe the page 3 at the bottom, Chad has a lot of his fire capital equipment expenses in this one that are coming in. And
he's
Yeah,
going to talk
that's
about,
about-
I mean, all those are, of course, budgeted for expected items. And he's going to talk a little bit about budget tonight. So we'll hit that at council.
that was about it for me, if there's no other questions.
Anybody have any questions?
This is Crystal, a second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second.
Okay.
Or no, we gotta,
Do
Usually those are roll.
roll call. That's
Okay.
right.
Todd Kirking,
Aye.
Todd Spaeth,
Aye.
Crystal,
Aye.
John.
Okay. Okay. Agenda item number 5 is discussion of possible action regarding the 2026 administrative and other budget drafts.
So I was in the process of getting the presentation ready for the full budget presentation anyway, so I figured I might as well start getting in the form here. So I did put together just a quick 15-page budget presentation, which is mostly just graphs. So tonight we'll go through the administrative budget, which is typically what we refer to as like what City Hall does, as well as a lot of items that are citywide and not easily broken up. So we just call them administrative budget line items, things like insurance. We'll also go through other, which are typically the three big ones: airport, and then it used to be all of municipal court, but now it's just the prosecutor, and then the taxi program. There's also something called Board of Health, but it's really minor. It's maybe less than $500 a year for the Board of Health, and that's our contribution into the health inspector. And then we'll just quickly go through general fund revenue. There's not a lot of changes we've made there. A lot of that is not necessarily within our control, especially the bigger ones. So that's on the agenda here real quick. Administrative budget, and I'll try to zoom in here. It's always tough to gauge how big things are when I'm sitting in my office with the screens up. But this is the administrative budget, which shows at the top here, we're requesting a $10,000 increase to the administrative budget. Again, reductions in expenses are shown as a positive number, and increases in expenses are shown as a negative number. So you can see here where the majority of that comes from, and I'll just walk through some quick highlights. So number one, the big number is wages. You can see it's a $17,000 increase. And what that is made up of is $4,800 in opt-out stipends. Again, remember, opt-out stipends were recognized as part of benefits. In 2025 and 2026, they were all moved to wages, which is why across the board you see increase in wages, is because now that's how the opt-out stipends are being recorded. So that's a large chunk of it. And then the wages do indicate a 9% for myself, 6% for Lori, and a 5% for both the deputy clerk and the administrative assistant. From a benefits standpoint, and part of what I'll go through as this is just kind of note what's going on, as well as any concerns I have with the budget at this point. So within benefits, you can see here that there was a decrease in the amount of benefits, and that again is because there's enough opt-outs that it's creating a positive variance there. The concern there is that right now we have about a $10,000 health insurance contingency that is in the administrative budget. And essentially that's there to help offset any changes that may happen to enrollment throughout the year across the city. So if we have somebody leave the city and somebody new come in that has a higher health insurance plan, that health insurance contingency is there to help absorb that increased cost. My concern is that $10,000 only gets you so far, and the opt-out program has been so successful that we've dropped enrollment from, I think it was around 89% enrollment to we're now right around 66%. So we dropped 66. Yep. So we dropped enrollment considerably, and my concern is if we bank on that, is there a potential for that to swing back? And for a couple more people who opted out to say, we tried that last year, I'd like to come back for whatever reason. And so I am concerned that the opt-out, the contingency amount isn't as high as I would like it to be. It doesn't even cover half of a person who wants to go from no insurance to a family rate, for instance. And so it's pretty meager and isn't going to do a lot of help if we have significant swings. So it's just a concern to point out, but right now it is sitting at just the flat 10,000. Miscellaneous insurance is the other big one. That's a $14,000 positive, which means we're reducing expenses. That's property liability and auto, most notably. Lori and I have been working with another broker through League Mutual. We're sort of trying to compare them against Tricor, who has been our ongoing broker since I've been here. They've done a wonderful job, really great people, very responsive, incredibly responsive, always willing to go to bat for us. But we're at the point here in the city that we have to try to squeeze savings wherever I can. And in conversations with the League Mutual Group, they're talking potentially tens of thousands of dollars in savings on some of their insurance premiums. Lori is still in the process of really vetting those. A little bit of it right away was maybe a little too good to be true. And so what's in there right now is a conservative estimate. They were saying, it could be 20, it could be 30,000. I said, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. So for right now, for the budget in a conservative method, $14,000 is about what we're forecasting now, but that will be shored up before, of course, we adopt the budget. Okay. And again, if there's any questions as I go along, by all means, feel free to jump in. The second half here is just looking at a few other highlights. Contract for services. A couple things we did here is, and that's this line right here that's going up $8,400. Number one with that, I actually did move all of the CETA contract over to the TIDS as a way to free up more money for the general fund to spend elsewhere. And the reality with that is that everything that they do is TID related. Anything that CETA has been doing has been TID related, so it's very easily to call it a TID eligible cost. So that was sort of some maneuvering we did. Equipment and supplies, the big thing there is the IT replacement. As you can see here, like we got to replace Joy's computer, and we've been using 2 switches that have been loaned to us from MCS Networks. They just let us borrow them until we had a budget where we could afford our own, which is a nice perk of working with them. But we do at some point have to use our own equipment. And so those together are gonna be about $3,000. The only concern I have with this budget is that I don't know how long this computer is going to make it, and the computer replacement budget is really, really meager. And a lot of folks at City Hall, I mean, that's our bread and butter. That's what we're using every day to get stuff done. And I just worry about, it seems like with IT, especially since we brought MCS Networks on, we're finding out just how crummy some of our devices are. But I'm hoping and feel somewhat optimistic that we're going to make it through next year. Just backing up to contract for services, a couple other things I'll point out is that the big reason that contract for services is increasing the way it is because of room tax revenue. We're going to have to give $10,500 more to tourism, but we're also probably receiving somewhere in the range of, I think it's 15,000 more in room tax is what I'm projecting next year, because room tax continues to be really strong in this community. We see a lot of high room rental rates. And then the website, this is sort of the first full year that we're going to be paying for the website. The previous year was, I think, a miss on the budget that we'll have to absorb. The contract was written awkwardly, so that I was assuming that the first year we were going to hit with it outside of the initial cost was 2026, and it's actually October of 25 that it's going to be hitting us, which, depending on how you look at it, makes sense. My only concern there, and the mayor and I talked about this as part of the budget team along with some other members, is that we really do want to try to get our ordinances in line, and the city attorneys have been really kind about dealing with the mess that is our current code system and the format in which we try to update it. But I think they're a little bit at their wits' end, and we do need to try to find a way to not only clean up the code, but get it into a format where it can be updated and be kept updated and easily searchable by members of the community, because it's a pretty archaic way that we're doing it right now. It's not currently in the budget as shown here because we're just sort of up against levy limits, but I'm hoping if some positive things happen, we can find a way to fund it. But that's a question for the budget team. And then with maintenance, that particular item is flat funded at 14,000, but man, are we continuing to go through that pretty quickly. The library, typically has one big expense per year. The police department, as great as a building that it is, it's the bones of it are over 20 years old. And so there's going to be things that continue to crop up on there. And just the cost of HVAC maintenance for those big of buildings is really chewing into it. So I just worry that we're not taking care of our buildings at the rate at which we should. But again, budgets are tight. Any questions on that portion there? Okay, this last one here just shows the administrative budget if we took tourism out, because that tourism amount really skews the numbers. And because not only is it a net zero item, it actually is a net positive item because there's more room tax that comes in than tourism that goes out. So when you really look at the budget after taking out the $10,500 for tourism increase, the administrative budget is actually in some ways dropping by $350. Now I say that just because it's another way to look at it, but the net savings that were really gained here are not yet assured because it has to do with the insurance, and also it's derived from expenses that happen to be in the administrative budget when they're really derived across all city departments, right? Because it has to do with like how much police cars cost to insure and things like that. So just a couple caveats, but I think in the administrative budget, we did try to be very meager with requests as much as possible while still achieving the goals we had set out to, which was to try to increase wages. Any questions on the administrative budget?
May I? Is there any way that we can look at all the computers and see if we can get a deal on a bulk purchase? Because it sounds
Sure.
like there's several involved.
Yeah. I mean, typically the guys at MCS Networks, I would imagine, have their ears to the ground on it, but it is a good question not to assume that they are getting the best deals. Typically, I think when we're getting bulk deals is they're looking for a large number of purchases of maybe the same type, and I just don't know if even across the city there's enough scale there to really get a discount. But it's a good question from Mike just to say, like, are we really getting the best price here? And but just looking at the numbers, they don't seem absurdly
Okay.
high, especially with the fact that he's got to go through and configure them all, as well as decommission the existing ones just to make sure there's no files or anything else like that existing. But it's a good question. Todd, did you have something? Okay. Todd.
So all the insurance throughout the city, all the vehicles are insured or is in this budget?
Everything except for some very small miscellaneous items, like the fireworks is a special line item. The airport has 2 insurance items. That's like a liability for their underground storage tank, as well as for just maybe their one of their other properties. Maybe it's their courtesy cars, maybe it's their courtesy cars on property, but
Yeah.
for whatever reason, the airport's on their own
Okay.
insurance
Yep,
policy.
but otherwise, everything else is on the
Yeah.
administrative budget.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we just haven't gone through the fact of like trying
Yeah.
to break things
Yeah.
out, but yeah,
Okay.
everything there between that's workers' comp,
Yep.
property, liability, auto,
Okay.
cyber, umbrella,
Yeah.
linebacker coverages, things like that. That's okay. All right. Anything else from administrative? Otherwise, we'll move on. Here's the other budget. And again, we'll start with the airport. So this is just the airport broken out. They're asking for 12,000, almost 600 of additional dollars. Really, the big things here are highlighted below. Wages, pretty minimal. Actually, they didn't ask for anything new this year. This was just a mistake that I needed to get fixed that actually lingered from 2024. So that $1,600 isn't actually new wages. It's just correcting a problem. Fuel and utilities is where the bulk of what's happening, and I actually broke them out to show you. So airport utilities, they're just not, that wasn't achievable what they had. I think every year they try to get a better idea of where their utilities are at. So they are going to need an increase there to just be more realistic. And then the fuel expense is an interesting situation. They were under the impression that they got to keep any net proceeds from fuel sales. But the way that the budget was set up, and this is as far back as when John was here, John Severson, the former administrator, there was always a net amount. There was always a difference between expenses and revenue for the fuel side. And the way it works within the budget, if there's a net positive in the budget, it goes to making the whole budget work across the city. But that's not how the airport treated it. The airport treated it as like, well, we have our own checkbook. Any net positives that we get out of this fuel stay with the airport, and then we can go spend them on replacing weather socks or lighting or whatever. And they're very good about using their fuel system. But the problem is both of us were expecting it. We were expecting it to balance the city budget. They were expecting it to all go towards the airport. And so the budget team reviewed it and said, well, the airport does a good job with that. If that's always been their expectations, I guess we can consider this another way to clean up the budget versus actually giving them something new, which is, in my opinion, is exactly what it is. So that's why it's showing as a $6,000 increase to the fuel expense. It's just being increased to match up with what the fuel revenue is. So that line item between expense and revenue is now exactly a zero offset. And then finally, maintenance, that was their sort of big push this year is they wanted $5,000 to crack fill on the new runway. It was put in 2019, 2020, so it's going to be about 5 years old now. Best practices say that's about how much they should do based on square footage. Budgets being what they are, basically said to Mike Skildum, what if the city gives you half of it and you use some of that new fuel money to pay for the other half? And that's sort of where the budget team landed on it. And they seem, overall, Mike Skildum seemed to think that the airport commission was very pleased with this budget. And I think they're always very self-sufficient over there. And this was probably the biggest stretch we've had with them in terms of new money going into the airport in a long time. But depending on how you think about it, about half of it is money they were already expecting, right? That's $6,000. So any question on the airport?
Real quick. So they're gonna hire somebody to do the crack filling, or is the city gonna do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, Todd. I would imagine the way it sounded like is that they were going to have somebody do it, contract out for it. But to be honest with you, didn't really get into it with Mike Skildum about.
I know I have done it myself. Well, when I was there,
Right.
we did it then before they had the new runway.
So it sounds like you're volunteering Sierra's group to do some crack filling.
I'm just saying we've done it before.
Yeah.
So that's why I just asked.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a good question to maybe ask, but I would guess at this point Mike's intending to contract out, maybe because of the nature of runways having to be pretty smooth, or maybe it's just cheaper to do it, contract it out. I don't know, but I'll bring up the question, Todd, and maybe there's something there. Okay, so I'll move on from airport. Taxi, I want to go through this just a little bit longer because it is somewhat complicated. So at the top is your revenue for the taxi cab, which is your grant funds. And then the taxi cab expense, which is the cost of contracting out for the taxi minus offsetting fare revenue. So the fare revenue we get from the riders is actually taken off the expense before it shows up on city books. That makes sense. This year, we went through and we're much more intentional about budgeting for this. In years past, taxi has been challenging, one, because the timing of grant payments is poor, which means they're really slow for whatever reason. The DOT is really, really slow about getting us our money, and it usually shows up 6 to 7 months later. On top of it, there's been a tremendous amount of COVID money that has come into transit, and that money is finally running out. So in previous years, it was like, I have no idea what to even budget for. We're just getting hand over fist money from them, and the numbers are so off. It was really challenging to get a beat on it. But because that COVID supplemental funding is going away, we were really intentional this year about strengthening our budget and doing a lot more forecasting than what we've typically tried to do. And so a good chunk of why you're seeing both of these things increase is because we were just more intentional about using actual numbers instead of sort of the traditional numbers we've used in the past. The other reason, and I will say as we roll down, that because budgets being what they are and we are knowing we're going to have to come up with some more money, this budget does include a fare increase. Okay, and that was a conversation that we have. We need to have a public hearing, and there has to be more steps to it. But just so you know, if we're going to make this budget work, there has to be a fare increase. Again, as I've said before, it's a tough budget year. There's a lot of tough decisions we have to make. In the past, I think historically, the council has been reluctant to put more of the pressure on some people using public transportation because it's often been the people who have the least amount to give. However, what we have here is what I would call a very balanced approach to fee increases. And basically, I call it rounding up, right? Anything that's under $5, round up to the nearest dollar. And often you're talking about a 25 or 50-cent increase. Anything that's above $5, like this agency fee here or here, so this is seniors and folks with disabilities, I round up to the nearest 10, right? And we did work with passenger transit, and all these numbers are very much within the average or below average for fares across the state. So we're not we're not out of whack compared to other communities who run transit. And then parcel, we went really high because the comment there was there's no reimbursement for it from a grant. It was never why transit was intended. It's has liabilities to it. Like this is somebody like go to Walgreens and pick up my medication or go get my groceries, almost like DoorDash or something like that. And it's not how we don't want to subsidize that type of use. We want to subsidize actual people moving around. And so moving that up from 10 to 15 is in some ways like if you really need it, it's going to cost you more. And also in some ways, maybe we just disincentivize it happening. So any questions on that? Todd, I saw you leaning in and I couldn't tell if it was to hit your mic. Okay. Finally, and what I'll note here is this number right here, when this budget was made. So I always try to use a point in time for every budget. And this was from the budget team. This is from the last budget team. At that point, there was a huge unknown whether or not DHS, which is where the agency fees are allowed out of, right? Those are all your social services that pay a higher rate as an agency fare, whether or not they would be allowed to continue to do so per new DHS rules, right? As of me making this today, I think we've confirmed that the agency fare will remain an option. And essentially what that means is that this net expense up here is really this change in net expense is really going to drop. Losing the agency fare would have been a absolute killer, not only for our city, but for cities across Wisconsin, because it is the most expensive fare besides the parcel fare. And it's also the most used. It's about 33 to 40% of all fares that are used in the city. So to have that drop and go from being able to get $10 to maybe only $3 would have been devastating. And so the budget did prepare for that eventuality, and this is why that number is so high. But I think we'll feel comfortable knowing that number will come down considerably, and the budget team, when it takes a look at the budgets again, can see how maybe it can reallocate money. Now I'll say that, and just a reminder that there are a bunch of other numbers that are still coming in, health insurance being one of them. And unfortunately, we just got word the other day that the transportation aid has dropped significantly. Sarah and I are still looking into that to see if it's accurate. But if that holds true, that could be somewhere between $20,000 and $38,000 of a drop in that aid. So we might get excited as like, oh, what can we do with that additional money saved now that that fare is there? But the reality is like we're kind of winning some and losing some here with other dollars. So we got to wait for the dust to settle on everything, and then the budget team can kind of make one last go at it. I know that's a little complicated, but is there any questions on the taxi cab as a program? Okay. Here's some of the other smaller ones. This is the prosecutor that we use for circuit court as well as the Board of Health. And as you can see, it's a drop of $1,800 in costs. We're doing really well on the prosecutor, but I don't want to be really aggressive about dropping that budget line too much because we don't even have one full year yet of knowing what that looks like. And I would like a little bit more data before we get too aggressive about dropping that number. So far so good, but time will tell. So here's what it looks like overall for all other budgets. Again, are the numbers I just went through, and the total change in the expenses are $100,000. But do remember there's about $32,000 that's offsetting that increase already, in that we don't expect the expenses on the taxi cab to really be as high as they are here. Okay. And we can go back if you have any lingering questions or think of something later, we can go back. Here's the revenue. I just like to go through this again. We've seen this before when I presented to this committee as part of my budget proposal, I believe. Or maybe it was to the budget team, but I'll go through them again in case I'm misremembering. The highlights, so overall, it's about $281,000 in revenue. And that increase in revenue always generally has to match up with the increase in expenses. That's how we get a balanced budget, right? The property tax increase right now is just a hair over $170,000 increase. It's a 6% increase. It's important to note with that part of the reason we're able to increase the property tax levy the way that we are is because TID 3 closed. And when TID 3 closes, the Department of Revenue allows you to increase your property tax levy based on a formula. It would be great if they just said, oh, this is how much new tax base is now out in the open, so to speak, and no longer within a TID. Apply your levy to that, and that's how much additional money you can have. That's not how it works. They basically say you get half of whatever percentage your tax base increased. So not nearly as great. Intergovernmental revenue, you can see some stuff up, some seat down. Shared revenue, personal property aid, mass transit, pilots are all up combined for 71,000. Library and county, so those are like sort of the library intergovernmental revenues are up almost $8,000. Those ones are kind of weird because it seems lately like one year they're up 8,000, the next year they're down 8,000. So as Trina has said, that's out of our control. It just depends who's coming to the library, but there's just kind of this weird pattern as of late. And then fire agreement, because we're now, instead of it being a fire agreement, the townships are paying for utilities. It's just showing up differently in the budget. And then tax equivalency is down $36,000. As I pointed out in the Q1 review, Cheryl and I took a good guess at what it was going to be. I got a little too aggressive with my forecast, and I guess because of depreciation number, that number's significantly down versus what we budgeted for this past year. But it's certainly, we're not going to recognize it in 2025 either. So those are where your kind of drops are at. Some other items, public charges, the big one here you can see is going up. That's your garbage fee, and that's really all that is. Garbage fees are going up. So we charge more to the consumers or to the residents per household. So it's always kind of a net zero number. And then interdepartmental revenue, this is the increase in the township's contributions. And the $22,000 is just on the salary side. So as Chad mentioned before, like the new fire officer is going to be more expensive than the admin assistant, but the townships are budgeted to pitch in an additional amount as well for that. So between that as well as the just the increase that they're projecting in the number of fire calls and stuff like that is why that township contribution is going up. So that's really the long and short of what's in the admin other budget. And then I took a brief run through revenue because it's somewhat always related. I'm happy to go back and look at anything. We have about 22 or 25 minutes or so. We certainly don't need to use all that time, but that is sort of what the budget team had pushed out there for the administrative other budget. Questions, concerns, thoughts?
All right. Item number 6 is a second period for public comment. If there's anyone in the audience, online or in person who'd like to speak to us, now would be the time to do so.
Thank you, Greg.
Nobody? Then we would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
The other Todd, I'll second it.
All right, motion and a second for adjournment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, pose same sign. Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.